Hi everyone, thanks for joining on. It's Steve here. We're going to kick off as normal about 5 past, just to give everyone a chance to join on. So we'll go quiet, but we'll be kicking off about 5 past. Cheers, guys. Speak to you in a sec. Couple more minutes, guys, and then we'll get cracking. Okay, right. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining on. So this is the fourth in the 5-part series of our masterclass sessions. I'm very pleased to have joined me Barum Jeffries. For anyone not familiar with Barum, he's done a lot of work with large multinationals like Michael Page and also other fast growth recruitment companies like Harnham, and now runs his own training business. We've been lucky enough at Sourcebreaker to actually have had a training session from Barum, and it's had fantastic feedback, really, really positive from all of the guys. So I know it's going to be a really good session for all of you. Before we get cracking, I'm just going to pop in a couple of links. So one is to Barum's website, which is reclearn. So just going to pop that into chat section. So that's reclearn.com. Well worth a look. Lots of good stuff to be learned from Barum. And then also his LinkedIn profile as well. Feel free to connect. Barum, you're happy to connect with everybody, I'm guessing?
Yeah, certainly.
Good man. Okay, cool. And just a final couple of things. Please, by all means, connect with me. I'll just pop my profile in there as well. And then also follow the Sourcebreaker company page. So Barum, myself, Sourcebreaker will be constantly posting various different bits of content that's going to be useful for you guys right at the moment, but then also in the future as well. So feel free to connect with us. We'll be more than happy to. So the last thing to do, just before we get kicked off into the session, is we've got a poll. Everybody loves a poll, and it's just talking about the difference in job opportunities that have been available from April to May. So I'm going to launch the poll now. Obviously, I know we're into June now, so think about from April into May and now into June. How has the volume of jobs that you're working changed from April to May? So obviously, April is when things really hit hard. Have you seen any kind of increase? Has it been significant? Are things about the same? Or have you had a decrease from April to May along there as well? So are things starting to pick up, or are things remaining about the same? Okay, so we'll do another few seconds for people to think there. So from the worst of the impact to May, have we seen an increase or not? Okay. So give it another 5 seconds for anyone who's not voted, wants to. Don't worry if you can't see the poll. Just pop your response into the chat, and we'll be able to pick up on that. Okay, right. Let's close the poll now. So in terms of poll results, I don't know if you guys can actually see that. That's my first poll I think that I've done on this. So or maybe we did one last week, but I don't know if you guys can see the results. Just to read them out to you. So how has your volume of job opportunities changed from April to May? So only 2% have seen a significant increase in job opportunities. So it's a very lucky 2%. 24% have seen an increase in job opportunities over that time. 27% have seen things about the same from April to May. And then we've seen a further decline for 20% has decreased, and then 27% have seen a further significant decrease in May versus April. So hopefully we'll see a bit of a turnaround there. So hopefully that's some useful information for you guys. If you're in the significantly increased section, yeah, count yourself very lucky. 98% of people aren't in that boat. Hopefully some useful info for you guys there. So I've waffled on enough now, so without further ado, I'm going to pass you guys on to Barum for his interview prep, why preparation isn't enough session.
Super. Thanks a million, Steve. I think really interesting that 47% of people joining today's webinar have seen a slight decrease or a major decrease. And I think today kind of links into that we need to be maximising every single role that you've got. And for me, a key part of that is interview prep. So love it or hate it, interview prep is that part that we know can make a huge difference in the overall process. It's a chance for your candidate to represent you, to represent your brand, and done well, it's the glue that brings it all together. But what happens when it goes wrong? And that's what we're going to explore today. Today, I want to challenge you by actually saying it's not really about interview prep. It's about something else instead. So what have we got planned for the next 30 minutes? I put today's course based on the work that I've done. So over the last 14 years, I've been lucky to work with over 10,000 consultants. And I'm always looking at those, the ones at the top billers of the companies, the ones top of the board, to look at, are there trends? Are there things that they do that make the difference? And the answer is yes when it comes to interview prep. So today I want to share with you what I have gathered and found over those last times. So we'll start by exploring what I feel is the real purpose of interview prep. I, in my roles, have sat within internal HR teams, talent teams, and I've led learning and development teams. So I've had inside access to what clients actually look for when they're interviewing. So today I want to give you backside or backstage access to what clients actually look for when they interview. And we'll talk about how that can inform your interview prep. I do love, and those on the webinar today that I've worked with before, hello, you know I love an acronym. So today's acronym is TACKLE. 6 parts to the interview prep that will help you get that candidate at the best stage. And then I'll finish by talking a little bit about tech tests. So for those working in data analytics, Java, programming, even when a client is asking for presentations, I'd like to give some insight as to how do you best prepare your candidate then. And we'll talk a little bit about client preparation as well. As we do, I'm going to be asking you to go into the chat at various occasions so that we can keep the session interactive. And at the end, in about half an hour's time, we'll open up and you can ask some questions based on the content as well. So let's start with that first question. I'd love you to go to the chat and I want you to think about bad interview prep. And I'd love you just to jot in a couple of words. What is it that makes bad interview prep? You know, if you think about consultant pitfalls, what happens that creates bad interview prep? So if you want to just take a moment and type something into the chat. So we're getting some stuff coming through saying not a lot of time spent on it, not fully understanding the brief, no effort being put into it as well, candidates that can't be bothered, lack of knowledge about the client needs. Yeah, we're also getting some themes around when the client tells you it's just a simple interview process. So you can see from the responses, there's kind of lots of things that contribute to poor interview prep. In my experience, there are kind of 6 things that contribute to poor interview prep. They are, the first one, the consultant, it's rushed. You know, it's kind of 5-10 minutes. There's no structure, there's no planning, and it's very much a case of just get it over and done with. Linked to that, what I've noticed when I've done desk side coaching is those consultants who do less talking end up having better prepared candidates. So again, my question for you to think about is how much time do you talk at the candidate? And actually, is that the right focus? For me, a big one that actually interview prep should be specific to the clients that you're working with. And whilst there might be some general interview tips, we want to avoid it being generic. The ones on the side, though, are the ones that really elevate interview prep, and they're the ones we're going to look at today. No feedback or challenge, no candidate accountability, and no testing answers. Good interview prep for me, when I've seen it and analysed it, it's actually not about you sharing your information with the candidate, but actually it's kind of allowing them or giving them the space to show what they have already prepared and learned. So it's kind of like you're stepping into that tester or coach role to help the candidate see how ready they are for it. So how would I summarize what good interview prep looks like? Well, on the screen, you've got my definition of successful interview prep. And successful interview prep for me is enabling your candidate to articulate why they are the best match to the client's wants and needs. So I'd love to just deconstruct that. There's 3 things happening in this definition. The first one is the word articulate. At its core, you know, if we think about the interview process as well, an interview is flawed before it even starts. You know, behavioural psychologists will challenge the validity of interviews because an interview doesn't necessarily get someone to show or demonstrate why they are the best. An interview is about how somebody describes or articulates why they're the best. You know, I'm sure you've got candidates who are highly skilled, you know, on CV, on paper, they've got everything, but they just can't bring that alive during an interview. So good interview prep is about coaching, enabling your candidates to articulate that. The next piece in this definition is the word match. Again, at its core, we want the candidate to be able to demonstrate that link between what the client wants and needs. And I know Trevor, when he talked about taking the job brief, was exploring the difference between clients' wants and needs. How do you prioritize what's most important? So before we get into how we do it, I'd love to just offer up one word. Interview prep for me is not about preparation. It's about testing. Testing the candidate, testing their readiness, testing their responses, and most importantly, testing how well they articulate their skills, their experience, their match, their differentiators. And all of these things should be questions that you're testing every single time. But let's look at it in a different way. When I've been analysing and working with top performers and elite billers, the one thing that I noticed was actually interview prep wasn't just one phone call. It was a series of conversations. So you can see on screen, I've tried to map it out. At reclearn, we bring together neuroscience, buyer psychology, and just stuff that works. And what you've got on the screen is the stuff that's working in real life with the clients that I'm working with. So the first conversation or the first interaction is what I'm calling interview prep. Interview prep. And this is a conversation where you're getting the candidate ready for the actual prep call. Now, when could that be? It could be when you're selling the job. It might be as part of the initial screening or qualification. I know, for example, on temp and contract, you probably not have 3 separate conversations, but there's something about getting the candidate ready and that they know what to expect in conversation number 2. As part of the interview prep, you'll be wanting to set tasks, because that's then what you're going to check and test. So again, thinking about prep as a test, what are the things that you need the candidate to be researching, preparing, getting ready, so that in the call with you, you are maximizing the output. Then in the middle, you've got the interview prep call. And this is where you test. You test their preparation, you test their readiness. And the 3 words that describe this call for me is challenge, coach, and motivate. Once you've heard their answers, challenge it. How do they improve it? How do they strengthen it? If you're looking at their CV, then you can see that they've done data management or they've led projects, and they're not bringing that alive in your conversation. That's your chance to go, I think you're missing something. The client wants to see someone who has experience with waterfall, agile, scrum. How are you planning on bringing that alive in the interview? And motivate, it's about building confidence. From a survey done by the CIPD, they actually were able to show that confident candidates were 62% more likely to get the job. So there was something about them, a candidate having a sense of confidence, being able to articulate their experience could actually sway the client. And then finally, a post-interview prep check-in. Conversation 3. You might want to do this. And this is ultimate, probably the morning of the interview or a check-in before they go. And this is a chance to refine their answers. So if in the second conversation, you've gone back with, I think you need to work on your description of X project, in conversation number 3, you might revisit that and check their questions, their answers, and their concerns. So I offered that up because that's what I'm noticing the top performers are doing that's different than just the average consultant. Now, I mentioned at the beginning, one of my roles, I've sat internally within an HR team and a talent team, seeing what clients look for. So this model is useful because if you can understand what the clients look for and how the clients interview, you can then use it to inform your interview prep as well. So I'd love you to go back into the chat feature. And I'm going to ask, there are 3 things that if a client, for example, has been trained on interviewing, they will be trained to look at 3 factors. In fact, I've trained clients on these 3 factors. So my question to you is, what do you think are the 3 things that clients look for when they're interviewing candidates? And if you want to just pop that into the chat and poll function. Right, so we're getting some stuff coming through. Candidate knowledge, culture fits, enthusiasm for the role. Oh, love that. Who's that? Gord, the 3 Cs. Character, commitment, and capability. What a brilliant acronym. That works for me. Experience, skills and knowledge, company fit. Yeah, we're hearing the 3 factors. So typically, clients will be looking for 3 things. The 3 things they look for at an interview are candidate's ability, candidate's motivation to do the role, and candidate's culture fit. Now, I'd love to just provide a bit of insight as to the what and the how behind it. So at the ability stage, your candidate will, or your client will be looking for your candidate to show that the match in terms of relevant experience, similar projects, the skills, the competencies that they can bring alive. And typically, most clients will normally be quite good at that, whether it's competency-based interviews, whether it's some form of testing, whether it's example-based questions. Clients normally will be looking for the match. Now, motivation. Motivation actually splits into 2 parts. Motivation is motivation to do the job, but motivation to do the job at their company. So again, if we think about interview prep, we need our candidates to be able to articulate why they want the job, that role, why not another role, and why they want the job at that company. And I think that's the critical bit. This is where we really get what I would call precision in the interview prep. What is the sweet spot between what the client offers, the role and the requirements, and what the candidate can bring? And that kind of links into the motivation to do it at the company. And finally, cultural fit. The one that is often the hardest to measure. You know, we get clients giving us words, dynamic, creative, forward thinking, but actually that doesn't help us. So for me, this all links back to something that Trevor talked about. A lot of these points fit really nicely into the job brief. I think the job brief is one of, if not the most important client conversations. So have a think about how you can ask the clients, around these factors. So how do you test for ability? What would you hear from a candidate that would suggest that they're a good match? How do you assess a candidate's motivation to work at X company? How will you know that candidate's right for you? What type of backgrounds have previously worked? And you'll notice with those questions, I'm trying to move them more into an evidence-based answer rather than just a subjective, the client feels. The cultural fit one, if you can be bringing that into your job briefings earlier by really understanding what backgrounds do people work from. If you have access to LinkedIn Recruiter, using the search insights to see which companies do most people come from when they join X company. And again, using that will help you reduce the chance that cultural fit as an objective comes up. So I promised an acronym, and here it is, TACKLE. We've talked about the interview prep is about articulation. We've also talked about it's about testing, and that's where TACKLE comes in. Thinking about ability, motivation to do the job, motivation to do the job at that company, and culture fit. We then put all of that into these 6 stages. Now, when I say 6 stages, this isn't necessarily a flow. This is more to do with the topics or the subjects that you'll want to cover during your interview prep conversation. So T stands for type of interview. You'll need to be thinking about preparing your candidate for what they're going to expect. There's something really powerful about your candidate during that interview going, yes, I knew this was coming. And again, that will increase their confidence and that will help them articulate it more. So more you find out about the type of interview, the length, the questions, the experience, where it will be, is it going to be in a different office? Do they take them off site? That way you've got a candidate well prepared. The A stands for answers, now good and bad. And what I mean by this is you'll want to check the candidate's previous interview experience. So a really powerful question could be, what feedback have you received previously after interviewing? And that can help you identify where the focus areas could be. But what you'll also want to do is, this is where the coach or the challenge hat comes in. What does a good answer look like? But here's the key thing. What does a good answer look like, sound like for that company? And that's where you're bringing in, and you'll notice I'm leveraging back to the job brief, because a lot of the stuff that we prepare, that we share, that we challenge on, we're identifying earlier in the process. So again, if it's a competency-based interview, you'll want to be sharing, what does a good competency-based answer look like? If the client likes snappy answers that demonstrate ROI, and you hear that from a client, you'll want to share that's what good looks like. Now, then we move into C and K. And at the C and K stage, this is where you go into the test mode. So the T and the A are probably your setup or your descriptions or you talking with the candidate. The C and the K is researching, testing, analysing. What research have they done? So company and team, what have they found out? I see a consultant's job here as being on the sidelines. So you hear how the candidate is articulating it, and you're there to add in just those extra pieces. Too often, candidates will often end up just spieling everything that they know about the client, the company, the team. And actually it goes into the candidate's head, but it doesn't stick. So that's what the C is about. The big one, the K, the key skills in the match. This is where it comes back to articulating why they're right for the role. So at this stage, this is where you want to be testing your candidate. How are they going to articulate, bring alive, talk through their experiences? You know, you might want to reference on their CV, how are you planning on talking about the birdcage project? How are you planning on talking about the coding that you've done? And that way you then start to hear how a candidate is actually going to do it. You'll notice I've said key skills and key match. The key match for me is critical. One of the things I would be encouraging you to do is think about, why is that candidate perfect for this role? What's their USP? And they need to be able to, during the interview, articulate this succinctly and well to the client. So the K is ultimately the candidate sell, but it's from the candidate's viewpoint. The final two parts, L and E, logistics. Logistics, as we know, what do they know where they're going? Have they set enough time aside? Nothing worse than 5 minutes before the interview, the candidate calling saying, yeah, I'm here, but it's a warehouse, only to find that they've Googled the company's name and they're actually at their registered office or their post office rather than the on-site office. So again, something to check. And then E, and something that Nicole is going to talk about next time, is the engage. How committed are they? You know, would they consider the next stage or an offer if it was to come? And this is where we start to see the concept of pre-closing coming in at the interview prep. And we'll send you a copy of the slides afterwards. But for me, the tackle really is a useful support structure. It means you get to the end of the call covering everything that you need to. Now, one of the things I'm hearing from a lot of my clients, especially in this time, is the increase in video interviews. In fact, I'm hearing that some clients are actually saying that they may increase or continue to use video interviews as part of an ongoing process. In fact, some clients saying we may do stage one as a video interview. I'm not going to spend a long time on it. There's some great research out there, but for me, there's kind of 5 things you need to be covering with the candidate. The first one sounds really obvious, but they need to make sure that whether it's laptop or whether it's phone, that it's still. There is something quite distracting that if somebody is calling using their mobile and it's not in one place, that actually that can be a detractor that will get in the way from the candidate really being able to sell themselves on screen. Background, trying to really minimize distractions. So where you can, you know, moving somewhere in the house. Personally, I would say don't get a bookcase. You know, I think bookcases are lovely if you're being interviewed by the news, but I've heard of 1 or 2 examples where the books in the shelf have actually distracted the client. So again, keep the focus on the candidate. Dress and appearance. Yeah, the big challenge with video interviews, as we know, is that rapport is not built as easily. So that's where they need to just be showing up how the candidate wants to see them or how the client wants to see them. This links to me around cultural fit. So knowing a little bit about dress code, the norms of the business can feed into that. 2 final ones, back to lighting. I would always try and avoid having the lights behind them because it ends up having a shadow behind them, and actually that can be quite distracting. And the big one, And there are various apps out there. Getting, this is the test piece, getting your candidate to record, review. If you want to, you might even get them to record speaking on screen and send it to you for review. And again, just these little things will end up making the difference. So our final couple of topics I'd like to explore today. With a number of the businesses that I've worked in previously, they've focused on IT, data and programming. And as we know, many clients will often ask candidates to do some form of tech test. Now, this might also apply in marketing or sales when they're asked to put together a presentation. But how do you best prepare your candidate to pass the tech test? So I've taken this one slide from a whole course I do on passing the tech tests. But these are the questions that I would invite you to speak to the client about at the brief stage. So there are 4 things that you need to be checking with your client. The first one is output. What is it that a candidate needs to show, to demonstrate by the end of the test? So again, if it is to do with coding, what is the code ultimately driving? If it's a presentation, what is it they need to demonstrate by the end of it? And also asking, even if they achieved that, where else might they fail? The big one that we often hear is about process. So I know with some clients, they'll get feedback and say, yes, I sent my best candidate, but actually they didn't approach the coding, or they didn't do the presentation, or they didn't do the interview in the preferred way of the client. So again, this is where you might want to ask the client, do they have a preferred process? Are there any, do they use Agile? Do they use Scrum? Are there methodologies that are aligned to the organization? And actually being able to feed that back to the candidate as well. Then asking the clients, again at the job brief stage, what would constitute a fail? What is it that the client is going to be looking for that will opt the candidate out of the process? And asking what have previous candidates failed on? And then finally, what does success look like? By asking questions like this at the brief stage, it allows you to get inside the mind of how the client is going to be analysing, checking the ability, and it will hopefully reduce the feedback that the candidate's not been suitable. So the irony being, with a webinar, yes, it is one way, and I hope with what I'm sharing today, you're finding this useful. If you certainly want to carry on the conversation, do feel free to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. But how do we avoid that monologue with the candidate? How do we avoid it being a 20-minute call where you talk at them? So a couple of things. You want to set the context. If we go back to that interview prep call, post-interview check-in, help them see this as part of the process, sell the benefits, test their answers. If they know they're coming onto the call and they've done their prep and their research, the setup should be very much around your role. The fact that you're there to challenge, coach, and motivate. Vary your tone and style and make it a two-way conversation. Give praise if they've prepared a great answer, and work collaboratively. And that way you've got an engaged candidate. So just before we move to our final section on how it links to interview prep, I just wanted to share one slide on the other side, which is prepping the client, and what we can do to ultimately balance both sides. Yes, our focus today has been on the candidate prep, but here are my top tips for prepping the client. So I think the first one is you want to try and bring it into the conversation in an informal way. That way you reduce the client's resistance. They don't feel that they're being trained. Some clients will maybe feel that they don't need interview prep. And actually, if you're able to link it into an existing conversation, even better. To do that, I'd be recommending you use words like suggest and recommend. What I suggest with most clients is ... What I'd recommend to get the best, or for you to see the best candidates, is I think you need to explore how they've done X, Y, and Z. Now, for me, that's the reverse engineer. If you know what your candidate needs to articulate, so what is it? What's the key match? What's the key sell? What's the key skills? Work backwards and go, what question does the client have to ask in order to get that as the response and bring that into your prep. The big one, the reason that we add value, the reason that companies use good recruiters is because they help them streamline, simplify the process. So use that, share your experience. Not only will you want to advise, recommend, but you'll also want to give them insight into the candidates. We know it's going to be a challenging market. Even with an increase in candidates, we know people are being let go and furloughed and potentially people moving. But I think great candidates, those candidates still in role, those passive candidates, might be more reticent to move. So again, this is where with the client, you'll want to share the candidate's motivations, what Jeremy talked about last time, their push and pull factors. And it's another chance to reconfirm and check salary and rate expectations. Again, putting that marker in means that you get less chance of the client coming in with a low ball offer because you've refreshed and reminded it. I think the final piece I would just say is reminding the client that this is their chance to sell the role in the company. With what we've just talked about with passive candidates, potentially more nervous to move, clients can't be sitting there thinking, right, come on, show me, it's a partnership. So prepping the client ultimately comes down to helping them understand who they're seeing, helping them understand the candidate's motivations, the candidate's rate, salary expectations. It's helping the client see how can you get the best out of the candidates. It's about giving some hints and tips around interview style and also really leveraging what are the best clients doing. Who are the clients that the candidates go, wow, that was a good interview experience because, and that way you start to add value. And finally, my last slide before we open up for questions, the other piece in the puzzle. Nicole next week is going to be exploring the closing process and how you move from this stage in the call or the recruitment process to the close. Just as important as the interview prep is the interview feedback call. And I just wanted to offer one slide in terms of, as well as the interview prep having a structure, if it is done successfully, it has a complete link into the feedback call. So for me in the interview feedback call with the candidate, there are 4 pieces that you need to be checking. In my experience, often the feedback call, similar to the prep, is a bit mixed, it's a bit muddled, it's a bit rushed, and actually being able to separate, bringing in this lens of neuroscience to really segment and get the candidate thinking is going to create better quality calls. So step 1, you'll want to explore the interview structure, what questions they were asked, how did they respond, how did they bring alive their prep, and again, that will allow you to judge from what you've prepped, did they actually articulate it successfully? Useful, because if you're hearing that they haven't landed the answer, you might want to then be thinking, how do I follow up with the client? Could I get a verbal testimonial to back that up? Step 2, who they met and their thoughts on them. This is all about the team fit, the manager fit. Could they see a synergy, a partnership? But also it gives you some really fabulous information you can feed back to the client. Here for me is the most important one. This is the one that's often left out. What do they think about the role and how well does it link back to their motivations? This at its core, and for anyone that's worked with me before, you know how much I talk about push and pull factors and candidate motivations. You need to be asking the candidate, how well does it match what they want? You said to me, you wanted a role that was going to offer you stretch, that was going to offer you progression within 2 years. From what you've heard and from what you've seen and from what you've experienced, how well does this role do that? And by getting the candidate to step in and to ultimately in their heads make the match, creates a positive outcome. And finally, step 4, commitment to the next stage in the process. So to summarize what I've said, the interview prep, it's not about prep. Years ago, it was about just telling the candidate everything that you know. What I've seen over the last 14 years is that the recruitment process has evolved and candidates need, want, expect more. And actually the difference between the top billers are the ones that are really challenging, supporting, coaching their candidates to be able to articulate their skills. At its core, it's about a match and how do you help your candidate best show up demonstrate the skills, and ultimately show why you add value as a trusted recruiter. I'd love to continue this conversation with you. So if you found today interesting, do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. We're going to open up in a second and get some questions. But certainly if you want to catch up separately, let me know. Steve, I think we can open up the session now to invite questions via the poll.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Barum. That was yeah, really, really useful. So we'll move on to questions. Just before we ask questions, got one more poll for you guys. It's just to get an understanding of what your biggest challenges were prior to the arrival of COVID in the world, and then what your biggest challenges are now. So just a quick, simple decision between finding candidates and finding jobs, which was your key driver. This is before COVID, and then subsequent after COVID, what the biggest challenge has been. Okay, so we'll give that another 10 seconds or so. So before COVID kicked off, what was your biggest challenge, jobs or candidates? Okay, right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, right, nearly 50-50. We've got 47% of people. The biggest challenge was finding candidates, 53% was finding jobs. So now we're going to move to what is your current biggest challenge, finding candidates or finding jobs? So this is in the current climate, what's the biggest challenge, candidates or jobs? Okay, and we'll do another 5 seconds on this one. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so unsurprisingly, 85% of people now finding jobs is the biggest challenge. So previously about 50-50, 15% of people was finding candidates remains the biggest challenge. I think if I was a guessing person, I'd have expected that we'd have had more people saying finding jobs was a bigger challenge. But I think the webinar Barum's done today, I think regardless of whether you're looking for your big challenges candidates or big challenges jobs, it's just making sure that everybody's prepared and fully tested, yeah, throughout the process to make sure you're maximising your chances of making that placement. So if we have a look now to questions, guys, so please feel free to fire some questions into the questions field. So got a question from Rohit Barum. So Rohit is asking, if a client provides very limited information on an interview, as they don't want candidates to have scripts, how do you then get information from that client about how to best prep the candidate? So the client's reluctant to give you too much information to make it too easy.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and certainly I can understand the logic in the client wanting to see what the candidate brings rather than pre-rehearsed. I think two things come to mind. One, a lot of it comes to the setup of the briefing call. So whilst you're taking, I go back to the job brief, when you're taking the job brief, if you could even think about what are the 2 or 3 questions that would help you understand, back to those interlapping circles, what's right for this client. So again, rather than asking a question like, what would you hear, it might be something more broad, like, what are you looking for, what does great look like for you, and listening to those clients' words and then using that in the prep. The other way is, let's be realistic, you're going to have some clients that will give you very little time, those clients that just want to work with us on a transactional method, and I know some markets do very successfully there. I think that's where the skill is about looking at a job spec and actually guesstimating. So put yourself into the client's shoes and think, what is the client likely to want to see? The other thing you could do is use Sourcebreaker or LinkedIn, find candidates who work in the company. Are there any clues on their LinkedIn about the projects that they've done, the backgrounds? And I think that using those multiple sources will help you then inform and test the candidate.
Great answer, thanks, Barum. Okay, Kieran is asking, how do you deal with candidates that think they know better or don't think they need interview prep?
And the irony being is that the candidates that don't need interview prep are the first ones that say, oh, I've attended loads of interviews, which in itself is often a big warning sign, because loads of interviews normally means not a lot of jobs. For one, there's a couple of things. It's going back to those 3 parts, the interview prep, the interview prep, and the check-in. I would try and normalize it where you can. So if a candidate's saying, no, I've got this, you could be saying, great, what my job here is just to do 5-10 minutes. I'd love to just offer some insight. I think they often see prep as a lack of a valuable skill or a tool, and potentially that's where the candidate resistance is coming from. So for me, I would package it and go back to that. I really want to spend some time helping you understand what the client's looking for. From my conversation with them, I've got some notes that I think will put you ahead of the competition. So can you ultimately position it in a way that the candidate's going, okay, I'll give you 10 minutes. And we know you get that candidate on a call for 5-10 minutes. If you're providing value, they'll give you another 5, they'll give you another 10.
Great stuff. Thanks, Barum. How do you prepare a candidate for the "where do you see yourself in 5 years" question?
Oh. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is it really depends on the role itself. And the reason I say that is there are going to be some roles that actually the client is looking for a fast track superstar. They want somebody who is going to be, could be their second in command, possibly. There's also going to be some roles that actually they need stable, skilled, technical people who are going to grow and build with the company. So to come back to the question, for me, there is definitely something in the job brief around career progression. What qualities do you want? Is there progression there? Because that can help inform what's there. I don't have a standard answer because I think that a standard answer doesn't really work, and they often just sound naff. But I think what you can do is help the candidate link the answer to the second circle, which is motivation. Mm-hmm. And that will answer, why do I still want to be at your company in 5 years? I think that for me is the slight refinement. It's why do I still want to be here in 5 years, and what type of work do I want to be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're referencing the point about understanding from the client as well is critical, isn't it? Like some clients want the superstar. I think people make an assumption that everybody needs to portray themselves as this hyper ambitious, want to be CEO in 5 years, when actually in pretty much every company there are roles where your dream candidate has zero ambition whatsoever. They just want to literally come in, do the same job for 20 years and do it brilliantly and don't want to progress ever. And they just want to sit in the same seat and do that. So you're exactly right. It's just qualifying it really clearly. You haven't got someone going into do a job where they just want someone to stick at the job, talking about, oh yeah, I'm really ambitious and I want to do this and I want to progress. I think
where you get the feedback then they're overqualified.
Yeah.
Because something has happened at interview and the client's going, this level of motivation isn't the level of motivation that we need or want. Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. Okay. So Simon is asking, any difference between perm and interim prep?
Yes, great question. So two things I would say are different within the temp and interim world. One, those series of conversations will probably potentially become 1 or 2. Because interims and temps and contractors will be used to interviewing. I'm going to generalize. Typically, they're quite switched on to what good answers look like. For me, with the perm and interim, my focus will be on the K, which is the key skills and the key match. So for me, actually, it's about getting that temp or interim to completely articulate the value that they bring. You know, if we go back to the drivers for why clients use interims and temps, they need to be able to articulate that and sell themselves. So probably less around the company research. Good and bad answers you might want to check about, but yeah, typically it will be focused much more on the K of the tackle.
I think it's the achievements bit as well, isn't it? Focusing on not just avoiding almost responsibilities and just saying I turned up and this was my responsibility, but actually focusing on whether contract or interim, the actual achievements within that position as well.
Yeah, I know one really successful contract consultant, what they will do with their candidates is they get them to ask questions like, what will success look like in the role in the first 30, 60, 90 days? And once the client's answered it, they hold on to that answer. And then later in the interview, they link it to, well, actually, when I was at X company, this is what I was able to achieve within month 1, month 2, month 3. So I quite like that idea of understanding what success looks like and then demonstrating it through the contracts and what they've done previously.
Good stuff. Right, Jackie is asking, so their market moves very quickly through interview for good quality candidates. So how can they ensure a strong preparation for the candidate without overkilling it or indeed spooking the candidate by so much so quickly? So I think, yeah, the big question is, how do you get that balance between preparing to the right level and overkill?
Yeah, and again, I think that's where the tackle piece gives you hopefully that flexibility to either look at expanding all of it in depth, or if you need to, Jackie, you know, for me, it's a case of we go back to that word of articulating the match. If we just think about interview prep as testing our candidates for that, for me, that's the, you know, if a client says, I need somebody to interview me in 2 hours time, I'm going to jump on a call with the candidate, and my focus is just going to be, how do I help them articulate, check in, and help them see what is the client looking for from what I know, and how do we bring that alive? If that's a 6-minute call, if that's a 5-minute call, you're doing what you need to get that candidate to show up correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff. So we've got Kai asking a question. I'll field this one. What would you say the best approach when reaching out to clients now to do business? So I point you to the first webinar in the series, which was with Hannah Barum. If you go to reclearn.com and get in touch with Barum directly, I've no doubt whatsoever he'll be able to help you a lot with that. If you have a look at the rest of the series as well, you should be able to get some really good tips as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
For that one, Steve, I've actually uploaded a video that I've done around BD during COVID-19. So Brilliant. I'm sharing my top 10 tips. Just to give you a top line, I'm looking at the world through 3 lenses. So ultimately, clients are experiencing a period, or I think they're moving out of it, which was about survival mode. Then they're going into what I call the rebuild, and then it's the new normal. And actually, for me, successful BD is being able to match your conversation, match what you're offering to where the client is in this new world. So yeah, it's 30 minutes long, and you can find it at reclearn in the video section.
Brilliant, cool. Do they need to log in or anything like that, or just arrive on the site?
Just
Fantastic.
arrive on the site.
Cool, brilliant. So Gonzalo says, great as always, Barum. What's the best way of tackling a candidate's overconfidence?
Yes, and we talked about confidence being an important piece. I think this is where, if we go back to the interview prep call, challenge, coach, and motivate. I would say you want to be able to give feedback based on something. So rather than just saying, yeah, you sound cocky, I would actually link it back to what you know about the client. You know, what we know about the client is the types of individuals that work there. You know, they're able to articulate their skills in a way that is confident, but not arrogant, and quite humble. And if I go back to tackle, that sits under the A, which is good versus bad answers. So the great thing, Gonzalo, is as you'll know your candidate and you'll know the client, you can kind of go into that part of tackle kind of already ahead, going, right, I've got some work to do. On the flip side, you know, for those candidates that maybe work in front of a computer, whether that's digital, whether that's data, whether that's analytics, they might not be the most articulate or the most confident or socially confident potentially. So again, that's where you might need to dial up or give them that feedback on the A piece.
Good stuff. Okay, Joan has a question which is going to be a hot one, I think, for everybody at all times. You'd hope that there are fewer excuses for why people don't turn up to interviews these days, but Joan's asking, how do you preempt candidates not always turning up for interviews? I'd love to hear what the latest excuses are going around for not being able to make interviews these days.
Steve, so would I. So yeah, if you've had an absolute stormer or cracker, do please put it in the chat. We'd love to hear.
Yeah.
Coming back to the stuff that works in the neuroscience piece, when I've done kind of loss analysis with consultants and gone, you know, were there any signs that suggested that this may be a tricky process or a tricky candidate? Sometimes we sense them or we notice them earlier in the process. So I think for me, it's a balance of 2 things. There's preventing it from going wrong. And I think that's where, again, I'm going to go back to tackle logistics, checking, you know, what planning have they done? You know, if they're turning up to the interview prep call and they don't know how they're getting there, which bus, which train, how long it's taking, warning symbol for me. You know, that's somebody who isn't necessarily bought into the process. I think to summarize the question is, if you get a gut feeling or you're sensing that this could be a slippery candidate, I think you need to challenge, you need to test, and that's in terms of readiness. You might want to check their likelihood of counteroffer or contract extension. And if you are in doubt, give them a call or drop them a text. And if you're not hearing back, get there first. There will be some candidates that don't turn up for interview. On those 2 or 3% occasions, you want to be able to get to the client first to say, sorry, Jim's not being able to come today, rather than getting the call to say he hasn't turned up.
Speaking of nightmare interview situations, we actually had that with our head of engineering at Sourcebreaker. So this is our first technical hire in the UK. I'd seen this candidate for first interview, which was basically me just trying to sell the dream to him to persuade him to come and work at Sourcebreaker. So I managed to convince him that he needed to come back for a second interview, and that was with our basically like our non-exec CTO. And they just moved office, so they sent the postcode to the candidate for their office, which was one of the WeWorks in SE1 near Blackfriars. So they sent the postcode to the candidate and said, this is, the head of engineering role. It's a pretty heavy hitting role. We really needed a top person. The guy was a fantastic candidate. So sent them the address. And I got a call from the candidate after, probably a few minutes before the interview, it probably would have been. He just said, I'm in the middle of a housing estate in Peckham. I can't find anything that looks remotely like an office. The postcode that the candidate had been sent was just off the Old Kent Road in Peckham, which is a pretty scary area at night. So this is in the evening as well. It's a pretty scary area. So this is a really good candidate. I was like, look, you've been sent to the wrong place. I'm really, really sorry. We'll get you back to the office where it's meant to be. So sent him the right address, and the office in Blackfriars was a good 20-30 minute bus ride away. So he's jumped on the bus, got the bus to the office, and he's then sat in reception. But he's been sat in reception and didn't get announced properly to our non-exec CTO investor. So the guy who was meant to be interviewing him then left because the candidate hadn't turned up. So then he left, walked past Jack, who's fortunately now our head of engineering, and then left. And so I spoke to our investor. I was like, where are you? Like, he's waiting for you. He's like, oh, he didn't get here for ages, so I just left. And I was like, oh my God. So having sent this incredible candidate to a housing estate in Peckham, got him to get on a bus in the dark in the pouring rain, back to the Blackfriars, wait for 20 minutes, half an hour to see this investor. And then the investor just didn't interview him. That was an interesting conversation. It's like, look, I promise you, we're not completely useless. We blamed the investor. It was the investor's fault, to be fair. But blamed the investor and his PA for sending him off to the wrong place and then not waiting for him. But yeah, fortunately, managed to persuade him to actually come for the interview at a later date, and we managed to hire him, fortunately. But that was definitely a good test of his commitment. I wouldn't recommend that for amazing candidates, tough to fill roles, but he really did demonstrate his commitment there. So yeah, all good now. But I had my heart in my mouth for that period.
I think these things will happen. There's always those stories. I'd love someone to write a book on stories from recruitment land, just so I think it'd be a bestseller.
Definitely.
And I think the best thing you can do in that situation is just settle your candidate. They're going to be coming to the interview already thinking the worst. And again, if we think about them, how they're showing up and are they selling themselves, the best thing you can do is to be that voice to go, it's fine. Your job today is to settle and to go in and to do exactly what we've said. So I think as much as you can be the duck, above the surface, everything is fine. Below the surface, you're probably grabbing favors in from your team and your manager, whatever. But yeah, you need to be that stable pair.
Definitely. Well, we've got another few questions. So Maria is asking, what's the best way to help a candidate who's technically able but lacks confidence?
And I know that this is, again, I talked about it at the beginning. Unfortunately, we know interviews are swayed against people who aren't socially confident. There's a great book called Quiet, which is about the power of introversion. And actually, interviews aren't, that we expect people to talk about how good they are. Two things, Maria, I would say in that occasion is, in my experience, when you give people or when you help candidates know what to talk about, they're confident. It's often the lack of confidence comes because they're in a space of going, I don't actually know what to talk about. Am I going to be put on the spot? So the more that you can actually rehearse, and I would say with those candidates who are technically able, your job in that call is more of the M of the motivate. So hypothetical questions, how are you going to show your experience here? They come off with an answer. Your feedback needs to be much more around, that was excellent, and so very much yeah, this is how we build it going forward as well. So just to summarize that piece, it would be work with the candidate to have a toolbox of stock examples and things that they can leverage that will give them confidence. The other piece is the question I would say is, if you find it's a candidate who's not confident, ask yourself, is confidence needed? Is this a role that they're going to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day coding or sending out emails or marketing, and actually they don't need interaction with people? And if that is the case, I would be maybe briefing the client as part of the client prep. Let me give you an overview of who you're seeing today. You're seeing candidate 1. They're going to, this is the skills that they bring. They're looking for X. Candidate 2, now, slightly quieter. In fact, you'll probably notice that in interview, but their experience is X, Y, and Z. So if it's not important to the client, I would actually be helping the client focus on where they should be looking.
Yeah, I think it's a great chat, isn't it? It's educating the client and making sure they're expecting that it's not going to be the most confident candidate if it's, if that's not what the role actually even demands. Tim's jumped in saying the best excuse they had was a surprise funeral. So that's yeah, and I have a bit of a tricky one at this particular time, I suppose. So okay, right. So there was another one. So where Eamon's asked, how do you deal with it if you get a gut feel that the candidate may not turn up? Do you let the client know in advance?
And great. I am a huge believer on trusting your gut. From a neuroscience, from banging a neuroscience drum, we have more neurotransmitters going up to the brain than coming down. So therefore, actually, if we think it, but we feel it, we should trust our feeling. So, Eamon, what I would say to your question is, if you're feeling that they're not going to turn up, set in or set aside either tasks or checks to make sure that the candidate is bought in the process. And that could be something like, great, what I just want you to do is give me a call in the morning and we'll run through any questions you've got. If that call doesn't happen, warning sign. I wouldn't, for me, the question I know Eamon asked is, would you let the client know? I would say if you are only finding out and then letting the client know, something's been ignored. So it's, if you're in doubt, call the candidate. I know of some consultants who they'll call, they'll text, they'll leave it 30 minutes, and then they'll, go back to the candidate and say, I haven't heard from you. I actually am going to be saying to the client that you won't be making the interview today. If I don't hear from you, it's not going ahead. And then that way they protect the client relationship, and it falls back on the candidate.
Great shout. Okay, I think that is where we are with questions. So great story here from Claudia. So this was a slightly different one, not about someone not showing up, but they had a lady who attended the interview, wasn't successful, showed up at her office and undressed herself, demanding money for traveling to the job interview. My office was on the ground floor and it's fully glassed. That's one hell of an interesting interview feedback session. So a nice, interesting story to leave us on there. Yeah, thanks very much, everybody, for attending. Anything left for you to add there, Barum?
No, thanks, Steve. And yeah, I think this is a great process. And Nicole, next week we'll move into the final piece around closing. So great, thanks a lot.
Good man. Cheers, Barum, and thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot.
Bye bye.